Welcome back to the Career Profiles podcast. I'm your host, Sean, and this is the next instalment of the Career Profiles series and the penultimate episode. I've got one more episode left, one more character from the sport to cover after this one. But this one is all about a fighter who I knew quite a bit of detail about, but I didn't really know the ins and outs of this person's life and the career and the struggles. And this is why I love this show, because the research that goes into it, the learning that goes into it, it helps you understand some of these fantastic stories that do get forgotten about in the sport. And this particular individual, a Mr. Jersey Joe Walcott, is another story that I'm so glad that I'm doing, because it's another great tale of rags to riches and an underdog story. However you want to label this story, there's many ways in which you can. It is just a great story overall, and I'm really, really happy to be doing this one as the penultimate episode for this season of Career Profiles. Now, before I get into this episode, I am going to say a big thanks to those that have been supporting the show over the last 6 months. It has been a turbulent 12 months with Johnston leaving the show, Jamie coming in, Jamie leaving the show, and me solely doing everything with the show. It's been very turbulent, and I apologise if I have said this before many times, but it's for those that maybe have only picked this episode up and haven't heard any others recently. It's just for the benefit of you guys. So a big thank you goes out to everybody that's been supporting, those particularly on Patreon. Thank you so much. They have had early access to this episode, so thank you for continuing to support on Patreon as well. And for those on social media, those that are just commenting and sharing and engaging with the posts that I'm putting out across social media, the historical posts, the quotes, the on this day stuff that I'm doing, it all really, really means a lot for the support I'm getting just solely. And I also want to take a moment just to thank a certain individual who's helped put this episode together and done all the work in the background. His name is Hassan. He got in touch with me after I put it out there on a few of the episodes. You know, if you want to support the pod, you want to help the pod in any way, you want to be a part of the team, get in touch. Hassan got in touch, we had a chat, and he's structured all this together for me. So a big thanks goes out to Hassan. Thank you so much for the support in putting this episode together. I hope you guys enjoy it. This is part one. There is going to be a second part of Jersey Joe's career profile, and I'm going to get straight into it. Like we always do, we always like to start at the beginning of these stories and provide some context. Now, Jersey Joe Walcott, as you may know him, wasn't always called Jersey Joe Walcott. Arnold Raymond Cream, later known as Joe Walcott, was born on January the 31st, 1914, at his grandparents' house at 115 Pine Street, just a few houses down the street from his own home. Now, since Arnold didn't have the luxury of being born in a hospital, an official birth certificate was never immediately filed. Now, the issue of Arnold's age would continue to be a subject of debate long after he actually retired from boxing, although every source, including Arnold himself in several interviews, indicate that he was born in Merchantville, New Jersey. But he was actually born just on the other side of the Merchantville border, in an old section of Pensauken called Homesteadville. Now, Homesteadville was one of the oldest black communities in southern New Jersey, and would eventually be known as Matchtown because of a matchstick factory located in the area on Chapel Street. The area of Pensauken that Arnold was born in was a racially segregated neighbourhood. Ethnic enclaves of Italians, Irish, Jews and Poles were common in Pensauken, Merchantville and Camden during Arnold's childhood and youth. Arnold's parents, Joseph Alexander and Edna Ella, may have been born thousands of miles apart, but as fate would have it, they eventually met while living on the same street. Joseph Alexander hailed from the tropical Caribbean island of St. Thomas, where he was born on January the 30th, 1872, and Edna Ella was born in Jordantown, a small village within Pensauken, in May of 1888. Now, Joseph Alexander was fluent in 6 languages and spoke with a heavy island accent. Joseph left home after his father passed away and eventually emigrated to the United States, settling in New Jersey around 1889 when he was about 17 years old. When Joseph arrived in the United States, his original last name, Crime, would eventually change because when Joseph pronounced the last name with his thick Caribbean accent, the name Crime sounded like cream. In an interview given in 1947, Arnold said he was thankful that the last name Crime had been changed to Cream for obvious reasons. On June the 4th, 1909, Joseph and Edna married each other after 2 years of courting. They were married for 20 years and had 12 children, starting with Ruth in April 1907, Joseph in April 1908, Lester in August 1911, and Arnold on January the 31st, 1914, followed by Edna, Norma, Naomi, George, Dorothy, Bertha, Robert, and Barbara. Joseph, who was 16 years older than Edna, had been married once before to a woman named Mary. They had 2 daughters, Ella Eliza, born in December of 1892, and Thelma P. in June 1904. The records are unclear as to what happened to the marriage of Joseph and Mary. The Creams, like most families living in southern New Jersey during the early part of the 20th century, were extremely poor. Arnold's father, a general, labourer and mason, was a hard worker, but with such a large family to feed, clothe and keep warm, he was hard-pressed to provide for them on a labourer's pay. Arnold's mother, besides being a housewife and raising her large family, did side jobs such as washing and ironing to make a little extra money. A good day for the Creams would bring in $1.50, although both parents did their part to provide for the family. More often than not, they barely had enough to eat. Arnold, along with some of his siblings, suffered from rickets. Now, this was a common disease during the early part of the 20th century among poor folks, particularly children, and it caused the softening of the bones due to the lack of food and proper vitamins in the daily diet. Even though he and his brothers and sisters eventually overcame rickets, hunger was still a constant companion, and the Creams would see more dinner times than dinners. Once, when Arnold was 12, he came in for supper and found his mother sitting at an empty table weeping. "Go back outside and play," she said. "We have no food." It only got worse when his father passed away from heart disease on May the 21st, 1929. Joseph Alexander was buried on May the 26th, 1929 in Jordantown Cemetery. Arnold was just 15 when he passed away. Joseph's early death forced the young boy to quit Homestead High School and begin working full-time to help take care of his family. Working was nothing new to Arnold. He'd been doing it even before his father passed away. At the age of 13, one of his first jobs was pushing a wheelbarrow filled with sand or gravel and unloading it into a cement mixer. Arnold said, "It lengthened my muscles, and I think helped make me a sharper hitter." Some of his other jobs were cutting lawns for the rich folk, running errands, working on an ice wagon, selling papers and working at the Campbell soup factory. The nickels and dimes, of course, always came home to his mum. Although Arnold and his older siblings worked to help support the family, the Creams still struggled terribly, both financially and nutritionally. In a 1947 interview with Arnold, he said, "The business of getting enough food was always problem number one. We couldn't go to relatives to help. More often, there were relatives or friends in our house because they were worse off than we were and had nowhere to go. For 10 years in my house, we thought we were feasting when dinner consisted of scrapple, beans and cabbage, without ham, of course. Sometimes we had potatoes instead of beans or bread. Mostly, we had less, much less. I won't try to detail our desperate poverty. The suffering that undernourishment can bring is not a story to be told play by play. But I ask everybody listening to remember that our family had hunger as a constant house guest most of the time. It was demoralising. Poverty was a way of life. We didn't think about it then because it was a part of us. But it is a wonderful thing to escape." Arnold, of course, eventually did escape poverty, but it would take over 30 years of his life to do so. Now, the neighbourhoods that Arnold grew up in were established in the early to mid-1800s. The houses he and his family lived in were old and had none of the modern conveniences that people today take for granted. There was no central heating, air conditioning or insulation. The roofs leaked water and the cold air crept in through every available crack in the walls and around the doors and windows. Many of the houses in his neighbourhood didn't have electricity, indoor bathrooms, or running water, or glass in the windows even. Heat was provided by a fireplace or burning coal in an iron furnace, usually located in the basement. For light at night, kerosene lamps were used. Much of Arnold's life there was not enough money to buy coal to heat the house. During the cold New Jersey winters, the family was forced to huddle around the wood-burning stove in the kitchen to keep warm. Space was another problem that they had, and a luxury that the Creams didn't have. The houses that Arnold grew up in had no more than 3 bedrooms, and most likely just 2 for a family of at least 12 at one point living under the same roof. Often, the attic was turned into a room, and several of the children would sleep up there. Arnold spent his childhood and teenage years growing up in the neighbourhoods of Merchantville, Camden, and Pensauken. During these years, the Creams lived at several different locations around the area. At some point in the 1920s, they actually moved to 6201 Magnolia Avenue, where Arnold lived until his marriage to his girlfriend Lydia in 1933. His mother would live there until her death in 1943. Now, even though he grew up underprivileged and could have easily turned to a life of crime and trouble, he actually didn't. And in his own words, he said, "I never did a thing wrong." A lot of credit certainly must be given to his mother Edna. She was no doubt a pillar of strength for her family and did the very best to raise her children right. She was also a deeply religious woman who insisted that her kids attend the Methodist church every Sunday. Her religious influence would follow Arnold for his entire life. As an adult, he would regularly read the Bible and attend Methodist services. Arnold didn't have much while growing up, as we know, but there was still fun to be had for him. For entertainment during the summer months, swimming in the Delaware River was a great way to cool off from the heat of a hot, humid afternoon. Fishing the river was another pastime enjoyed by many. If Arnold and his friends could scrounge up a few nickels, they could see a movie at one of the neighbourhood theatres, or at the first ever drive-in movie theatre which opened in Pensauken in 1933. Of course, every kid played sports back then. During the 1920s and 30s, the 2 most popular were baseball and boxing. Arnold and his friends played baseball in empty lots, on homemade fields, or held sparring matches around the neighbourhood. Radio was the number one way to follow live-action sports back then. Friends and neighbours would gather round a radio and listen to the blow-by-blow broadcast of their favourite fighters, or sit out on the front porch and listen to a baseball game. Radio brought sports into the living rooms of America. Now, at that young age, Arnold was naturally athletic, and he displayed a special talent for boxing. He was clever enough to outbox and outfox the older, bigger neighbourhood kids. Over the years, he participated in countless neighbourhood matches, becoming quite well known in Merchantville and Pensauken for his boxing ability. These sparring matches would essentially make up Arnold's amateur career. From there, he developed his own style of fighting and learned an assortment of moves and tricks. Years later, as a pro fighter, he would use these same tricks and moves when doing battle with the greats such as Joe Louis, Cesar Charles, and Rocky Marciano. Joseph Alexander, realising his son had talent, gave Arnold his first pair of boxing gloves at the age of 12. Arnold said, "It was a great event, like some other kid getting his first fielder mitt." Joseph was encouraging his son, telling him someday he could become a world champion. One evening, as Arnold was putting out the trash and dinner was being prepared, out of nowhere, Joseph exclaimed to Arnold's mother, "Let me tell you one thing. If this boy gets the right trainer and manager, he could become a champion." To this, Edna responded and said, "Arnold, just take out the trash. Don't fill the boy's head with such things, Joseph." And to that response, Joseph exclaimed, "Never you mind, woman. I said if he gets the right manager and handler, he will be a champion." Well, Arnold was so inspired by the strong words of his father that he carried them throughout his boxing career and in his heart and mind for the rest of his life. And those same words would replay through his thoughts like an echo from the past, the night he beat Cesar Charles. When Arnold got older, the neighbourhood sparring matches become more serious. In the 1920s and 30s, due to the popularity of boxing, it was common for an aspiring young fighter to stage boxing matches in makeshift boxing rings that were set up in basements, backyards, or even garages. On one such occasion, An improvised boxing ring was set up in a basement by some of the older kids and young men from Arnold's neighbourhood. A tough local bully and known wife-beater was looking for a challenger. Arnold, who was only about 15 or 16 at the time, he accepted the challenge and agreed to fight the man. The bully, who was a full-grown man and quite a few years older than Arnold, was considered to be a real tough guy. Arnold's friends, thinking it would not be a good idea for the teenage boy to fight the older man, tried to talk him out of the match. But Arnold would have none of it. He climbed into the makeshift ring and, to the shock of everyone, proceeded to outbox and defeat the older man. Now, it was around this time that Arnold started hanging around some of the local boxing gyms in his neighbourhood. Although officially he would start his boxing career at Battling Max, Arnold trained at a few different gyms around the Merchantville area. One of the local gyms he frequented during his early career was Sikorsky's boxing gym. Before the Great Depression, Sikorsky was a bakery run by Walter Sikorsky and his wife. When the Great Depression hit, Walter was forced to close up shop. Mr. Sikorsky, who just happened to be an ex-fighter, decided to turn the bakery into a boxing gym. With boxing being as popular as it wasn't long before aspiring young pugilists from all over the neighbourhood were training there. Eventually, young Arnold found his way into the gym. He would spend several years training off and on at Sikorsky's, where he and Walter formed a friendship that lasted for years. The young fighter would often stop by the Sikorsky house after a workout. He and Walter would sit on the front porch, drink tea, and talk boxing for hours. Years later, when Arnold was training to fight Joe Louis, Walter Sr. would bring his 8-year-old son, Walter Jr., up to Grenlock Park to meet Jersey Joe and watch him train. Now, it was at one of these boxing gyms during Arnold's early career that a certain Jack Johnson, the former and first black heavyweight champion, stopped by. News of his impending arrival spread all over Merchantville and the surrounding neighbourhoods. Outside of the gym, Arnold, standing in the rain along with a group of neighbourhood kids and adults, excitedly awaited the legendary fighter's arrival, hoping to get an autograph or at least a chance to talk to the famous champ. Approximately 3 to 4 hours after his appointed arrival time, Jack Johnson finally showed up in a big fancy black car. The former champion got out, dressed in an expensive black suit, wearing a top hat and sporting a cane. He also had 2 enormous Great Danes in tow that proceeded to run wild and terrorise the crowd. Johnson, being in a hurry, rushed past a group of fans with little more than a golden smile and a few nods and disappeared into the gym. Much to his fans' disappointment, Johnson signed no autographs and had largely ignored them. It was at this point that Arnold vowed that if he ever became a famous boxer, he would never ignore his fans or refuse to give out an autograph. It was a promise that he would eventually keep. Now, it was a rough start for Arnold, but he toughed it out. He was eager to train and he dreamed of becoming a world champion. Arnold learned quickly that boxing is a tough sport. For 5 straight days in Battling Max Gym in 1930, Arnold was tossed in the ring with Roxy Allen, a top-notch welterweight from the Italian section of Camden. Allen, whose real name was Rocco Aletto, was born September the 23rd, 1909, and his professional career started in August of 1925, when he was just 1 month shy of his 16th birthday. Roxy was considered one of the best local fighters and had been fighting as a professional for over 5 years. Allen was instructed by Prince to give the young and experienced boy the full treatment, as they called it. Eddie Prince, who is Allen's manager, remembering Arnold's derogatory remarks about his fighter Johnny Lucas, and thought he'd teach the young boy a painful lesson that would, in his words, send him home for good. And Arnold himself later recounted this story. He said, "Roxy tried all right. He knocked me down 4 or 5 times, cut my mouth, blackened my eye, and gave me a bloody nose, all in 2 rounds. I took that kind of massaging for 5 straight days. At night, I looked at my bashed face in the mirror. I tried to solve for myself the giveaways in the movements of my hands or feet that made it possible for Roxy to anticipate everything that I tried to do. Furthermore, I quickly acquired a strong dislike for Allen. But time had changed my feelings. His influence followed me through my career and helped shape its present pattern." Eventually, Roxy took pity on the young would-be fighter, and a friendship formed. Roxy began mentoring Arnold, teaching him how to box properly. Encouraging the boy, Allen remarked, "Kid, you'll make a fighter. You've got heart." He even gave Arnold a used pair of ring shoes, his first. Over the next few months, Arnold showed up at the gym and trained nearly every day. After a time, Roxy realised that Arnold was serious about fighting, so he decided to help the young pugilist even more. He persuaded his half-brother, Johnny Duquesne, and Tommy Marcello, a junkyard owner, to become Arnold's manager and handler, respectively. They were the first of several in Arnold's long and rocky career. Arnold trained at Battling Max for approximately 8 months before his first professional fight. Like a lot of fighters during the era, Arnold's amateur career was virtually non-existent. Instead, he went directly into the punch-for-pay ranks. Training at Max, sparring with Roxy Allen, and boxing the kids in the neighbourhood was the extent of his amateur boxing background. In August, Arnold's manager, Johnny Duquesne, who was Allen's half-brother, came to him and told him to get in some steady road work and boxing for a couple of weeks. He said, "I have a fight for you over in Vinland." Arnold was so excited to have his first fight scheduled that he didn't even think to ask who his opponent was until the next day. For the next few weeks, Arnold trained hard, working with Roxy at the gym and covering a lot of ground with his early morning road work through the streets of Pensauken, Merchantville and Camden. On September the 9th, 1930, Arnold arrived in Vinland Arena for his first professional fight. At the weigh-in, the 16-year-old Arnold Cream tipped the scales at 165 pounds. Now bear in mind this of course would be between middleweight and super middleweight today. Still short of his full-grown height and weight, the teenager was already starting to mature into a powerfully built young man with broad shoulders and big hands. His opponent, who was about 3 years older than Arnold, weighed 155 pounds. His opponent was a small-time gangster from Philadelphia named Edward Cowboy Wallace. In 1933, Edward Cowboy Wallace was actually shot and killed in connection with a robbery and the killing of a police officer, Charles Stockburger. Wallace's body was found in Brownoir near Camden, New Jersey, riddled with machine gun bullets. Anyway, back to the fight, and Arnold was the winner with a KO in the first round with a vicious right hand that was faster than the opponent's left hand and had plenty of authority on it. Arnold hit the button, and down went Cowboy Wallace like a log. The 10 count was merely a formality. Arnold collected his $15 paycheck, paid his handlers, and walked away with $7.50. The triumphant fighter rushed home to find his mother, still awake and worried, sitting up waiting for him. Arnold handed her the money and excitedly told her the results of the first fight. She said, "Son, you will be the champion of the world if they give you a chance." A month after his victory, Arnold stepped into the ring for his second fight. He was scheduled to fight Indian Victor, but the fight fell through. Instead, he was matched with Jimmy O'Toole, an Irishman from Brighton, New Jersey. He was far more experienced than Arnold, having at least 11 fights to Arnold's 1. The fight was staged at the Camden's Convention Hall, just a few blocks from Arnold's house. The Camden Convention Hall was the premier place in Camden for sporting events from the time it opened shortly after World War I until it actually burnt down in 1953. From the opening bell, Arnold outfoxed his more experienced foe. By the 4th round, he was in command and he dropped Jimmy to his knees with a well-timed 1-2 combination. Bravely, the Irishman got up only to be hit by a hard-looping right hand from Arnold a few seconds later. The punch opened up a deep, ugly gash under O'Toole's left eye that instantly started to gush blood. Jimmy finished the round on his feet, but was a beaten, bloody fighter. An examination of the cut at the end of the 4th round prompted referee Walters to stop the contest, since the cut was ruled too dangerous to let Jimmy continue. Happy with his win, Arnold jumped right back into the ring 2 weeks later against Frankie Mitchell, scoring a 4-round technical knockout. The Mitchell fight was the last known fight that Arnold had in 1930. Arnold would fight only one recorded fight in 1931 against Carl Mays on April the 20th at the Waltz Dream Arena in Atlantic City, New Jersey. A hard right hand to the head in round 2 sent Mays to the canvas for the count. So fast forward to 1932, and Arnold had other things on his mind beside boxing. He was heavily involved with his girlfriend, Lydia. Now, the two had grown up in the same neighbourhood and had been friends for years. As they matured into young adults, their relationship became more serious. Around November or December 1932, Lydia broke the news to Arnold that she was pregnant. On the 15th of April 1933, Arnold Raymond Cream married his childhood sweetheart Lydia Eleanor Talton. Now, at the time of the marriage, Arnold was just 19, Lydia only 16. Lydia's parents objected, especially her father, Jesse, who was a Baptist minister. The wedding ceremony was performed at the United Methodist Church, located at 5015 Chapel Avenue in Merchantville. At the time of the marriage, Arnold only had $2.05 to his name. The marriage certificate cost $2. According to Arnold, he and Lydia had a nickel honeymoon. Shortly after the marriage, the young couple found a small house in Merchantville to rent. They settled in and prepared for the arrival of their first child. Arnold continued to work a daytime job and train to fight. Around this time, the young fighter decided it was time to step up his boxing career. He headed over to the Benjamin Franklin Bridge to Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love. Philly at this time was a hotbed of boxing activity. There was a lot of great champions that had come from Philly. The city rivaled even New York for the privilege of being called the boxing capital. In no time, Arnold found a suitable gym, the Arcadia, at 123 North 13th Street. The Arcadia gym was one of a number of popular boxing gyms that could be found in Philadelphia during the 20s and 30s. Fighters from all over the world trained there when in town to fight. If a young fighter were going to get somewhere with his boxing career, there was a good chance he would do it in Philly. At this time, Arnold decided the name, Arnold Cream, was not befitting of a future champion. Like countless fighters before, he decided to adopt the name of a past ring great. A fighter using the name of a great fighter from the past or altering his name was nothing new. Fighters had already been doing it for years. In Arnold's case, he borrowed the name from the favourite fighter of his father, Joe Walcott, aka the Barbados Demon, the welterweight champion of the world from 1901 to 1904. As a kid, Arnold read everything he could get his hands on about the Barbados Demon. Arnold began using his adopted ring name in 1933. It wasn't until 1935 that he added Jersey as a way to distinguish himself from the original Joe Walcott and let everyone know where he came from. So from that moment forward, he was known as Jersey Joe Walcott. Now Arnold caught the attention of one of the gym's trainers, Jack Blackburn. The lanky Blackburn had once been a great boxer himself and had battled such legends as Sam Langford, Harry Greb and Joe Gans. During a boxing career that spanned over 20 years and had perhaps as many as 385 fights, Blackburn became a master boxer and gained a tremendous amount of knowledge. After retiring from the ring in 1923, Blackburn put his knowledge to use as a trainer. Blackburn is seen today by boxing historians as a genius. Walcott and Blackburn hit it off and became fast friends. The young fighter and his trainer shared two things in common: empty pockets and a love for boxing. Blackburn taught Jersey Joe how to turn his right hand when he threw it and how to catch punches in the air and how to slip inside and outside of his opponent's punches. Jersey Joe's confidence grew under Blackburn's teachings. The education he received from Jack was priceless. Unfortunately, Walcott had little opportunity to display the skill he was learning, because the Great Depression had started to take a heavy toll on the business of boxing. Jersey Joe, like a lot of fighters, especially black fighters, had a hard time getting fights. Even when he could get a match, the money he made just wasn't enough to live on. As a result, Walcott had to continue to work a day job. While training at the Arcadia, he worked on an ice and coal truck for $12 a week. It was a physical job that kept him going from 7 in the morning until midnight. Tossing around sacks of coal and heavy blocks of ice had one benefit though, as it added muscle to his already muscular frame. Even though the job kept the Creams eating, it left Joe with little time to train and surely caused him to miss out on potential fights. Although he was not able to spend as much time training as he needed, he did continue to fight when he could because he needed the extra money to feed his family and still dreamed of becoming a world champion. On July the 28th, 1933, at the Pennsauken Arena, Walcott had a chance to display his skills against Henry Taylor, a tough, hard-punching young fighter from Philadelphia. The fight turned out to be an easy one for Walcott, a first-round technical knockout. It was the first time that Taylor had suffered such a loss. A week after the Taylor fight, on August the 4th, Lydia gave birth to the couple's first child, Arnold Cream Jr. 3 months later, Walcott and Taylor fought a rematch at the New Broadway Athletic Club in Philadelphia. Joe had Taylor down 3 times in round 1, but Taylor battled back to take command of the fight. This time, it was Taylor who won in a 6-round decision that handed Jersey Joe his first defeat. In the spring of 1934, Jack Blackburn showed up excitedly at the Arcadia one day, waving a telegram and saying, "The Lord come to my rescue." The telegram came from old acquaintances Julian Black and John Roxburgh. According to the telegram, Blackburn was offered a job in Chicago to train an amateur champion. The job paid $25 a week plus a percentage of the purses. Blackburn told Walcott that a money order was on the way and that the money was enough for the both of them. "Pack your duds and come along," he said. "I'll make them handle you too." Walcott's response wasn't as enthusiastic. His reply to Blackburn was that he would have to talk to his wife about perhaps following in a week or two. The offer from Blackburn to go to Chicago was perhaps a golden opportunity, but unfortunately, Joe missed out on that opportunity. Instead, fate stepped in. Later that evening when he got home, he had a headache, didn't feel well, so he threw himself into bed. The next day brought a high fever, vomiting, and a stabbing pain in his back and abdomen. A trip to Cooper Hospital revealed that Joe had contracted typhoid fever. For 3 weeks his temperature was up and down and at times climbed as high as 105 degrees. Joe was bedridden for 2 months, his weight dropping from 190 pounds to 130. Confined to bed, Walcott was unable to get back to the Arcadia to talk with Blackburn before Jack left for Chicago. Walcott said, "Blackburn must have gone away thinking I didn't care, but I did very much. If I hadn't have gotten sick and been able to meet that man in Chicago, who knows? I could have been the champion before Joe Louis." While sick from typhoid in 1934, Joe was unable to work and had no alternative but to apply for assistance from the state. Walcott only accepted unemployment benefits when he absolutely had no other choice. He was and always remained a hard-working man. Years later, when he finally began to make some money, Jersey Joe paid back every cent he had received from the state. Swallowing his pride, Joe went down to the state unemployment office and filed for welfare. The Cream family received $9.50 a week in the form of a relief check. The money was hardly enough to buy food, and certainly not enough to pay the rent. As a result, the Creams quickly fell behind financially. In no time, the landlord showed up at the Walcott's door with an ultimatum to pay or get out. Unable to come up with the money, the Creams were soon evicted. Over the course of the next several months, Jersey Joe and his family were forced to move from one rundown shack to another, always one step ahead of eviction. Although he was extremely weak and could barely lift a rake, Jersey Joe was desperate. He was hired off of the relief roles and took a CWA, which is a Civil Works Administration, and worked as a gardener in the Camden Parks for $15 a week. Combined with whatever work Lydia could get, the family managed to survive. Slowly, over the course of the next several months, Joe began to gradually recover. He gained his strength and weight back and eventually got a job doing heavier labour on the roads. By the midpoint of 1935, Lydia was about 3 months pregnant with their second child. The Creams were going to need more money. Feeling fit enough to continue his boxing career, Walcott decided it was time to head back to the Arcadia. It had taken a little over a year for Walcott to fully recover from typhoid fever. By the time he went back to the Arcadia to train and continue his boxing career, Jack Blackburn was long gone, having accepted the job in Chicago to train a young amateur champion. Now that amateur boxer turned out to be none other than Joe Louis. Together, Blackburn and Louis would make history. As for Walcott, he would continue to struggle to survive for the next 10 years before another golden opportunity came knocking on his door. So it had been over a year since he'd actually climbed into a boxing ring. Since his return to the ring after his battle with typhoid, Walcott racked up 4 victories, all by knockout. His opponents were Lou Alva, a Spanish fighter that he fought on August 27, 1939 in Pennsauken, Pat Rowland, a Brooklyn heavyweight that he fought on October 10, 1935 at Camden Convention Hall, The fight was scheduled for 8 rounds, but Jersey Joe only needed 4 to knock out Roland. His most important fight was against fellow New Jersey fighter Al King for the light heavyweight championship of Southern New Jersey on October the 29th, 1935. The fight was at his usual hangout, the Camden Convention Hall. Joe stepped into the ring weighing 180 pounds, King at 174. At just over the 2-minute mark of round 1, Walcott caught King coming in with a perfectly timed hard right to the jaw. The punch sent Al to the canvas, his head banging against the hard ring floor. The combined impact of the punch and King's head hitting the canvas knocked Al out cold. His seconds rushed into the ring and attempted to revive him, but they were unable to. They moved the fighter to his dressing room and anxiously waited for him to recover. Jersey Joe was terror-stricken, fearing he might have killed Al. As he waited for Al to regain consciousness, Joe prayed that his incapacitated opponent would recover. Finally, after 2 hours, Al awoke and was not seriously injured. For his victory, Walcott was awarded the title of light heavyweight champion of Southern New Jersey. Along with the title, he was given a belt, which he proudly displayed to his friends and family members. Walcott's 4th opponent was his old mentor, Roxy Allen, who he fought because he needed money. They fought on November the 26th, 1935. Now, although he had won the light heavyweight title, this didn't help the financial situation and only a little for his boxing career. In fact, Walcott was in debt again and running out of credit. He and Lydia were being hounded by the grocery store, the milkman and the landlord for immediate payment. The fight was arranged at the convention hall. Arriving for the fight, Joe was unexpectedly stopped at the entrance by a stranger who wanted to introduce Joe to a small, dark man. "Here's the original," said the stranger. "Meet Joe Walcott, the Barbados demon himself." Joe was absolutely thrilled and inspired by the incident. After all, Joe Walcott was Jersey Joe's idol. Although Joe didn't have a dime to his name to buy a ticket, he managed to get his hero a ringside seat. Now into the fight itself, and Roxy Allen floored Jersey Joe with a big left hook in round 1 for a count of 7. When Walcott got up, all of his old dislike for Roxy came flooding back. Once up, Walcott proceeded to batter Allen without mercy, finally knocking Roxy out in round 8 with a left hook. The blow sent Roxy to the canvas, his head hitting the floor of the ring hard enough to make it bounce. Roxy's body stiffened, and Jersey Joe again had that awful feeling that he might have killed an opponent. Roxy was taken to Cooper Hospital. That night, Joe prayed for God to spare Roxy's life. The next afternoon, Roxy regained consciousness, but remained hospitalised for 10 days. After the fight, Barbados Demon paid Joe a visit in his dressing room, giving him a hug and saying, "Lots of fellas take the name Joe Walcott, but you're the only boy I ever saw. I was actually proud to have using it." At this point in his boxing career, he'd now positioned himself to face his first top 10 rated opponent. A week and a half before his 22nd birthday, on January the 21st, 1936, Walcott took on Al Ettore, a rugged and popular Philadelphia fighter. Ettore was ranked number 9 with a record of 52-7-2 with 16 KOs. Al had been in the ring with the likes of Tommy Loughran, Jimmy Braddock and Willie Reddish. He would go on after his fight with Walcott to battle other notable fighters such as Joe Louis, Maxie Rosenblum, Arturo Godoy and two-ton Tony Galento. Now Walcott came into this fight with an 11-1 record with a string of 11 knockouts. And the fight was supposed to be a coming-out party for Jersey Joe, and all of Camden was there to cheer him on. Regardless of the fact that most people were depression poor, dozens of Walcott's hometown friends showed up, along with a crowd of some 4,000 spectators. It was the largest crowd that the convention hall had seen in a long time at that point. Al Ettore was one of the toughest fights for Jersey Joe. It was a slugfest, and Ettore had given Walcott multiple body shots that made Walcott exhausted, and he collapsed at 1 minute and 8 seconds of round 8 from a hard right to the pit of the stomach, and was unable to continue. Beaten by hardship and Ettore's brutal body attack, Joe suffered his second defeat and his first TKO loss. The Ettore fight was no doubt a huge disappointment for Walcott and his fans. Now 4 months after that fight with Ettore, Walcott was back in action. Joe was matched against one of the most avoided heavyweight fighters around, tough Willie Reddish. Well, he was a former Philadelphia Golden Gloves amateur champion. He turned pro in 1932 and had been in the ring with some very good competition, such as Itor and Haynes. Walcott was awarded the decision after 8 rounds of mostly body punching and a lot of clinching. It was a spectacle that annoyed one of Philadelphia's largest outdoor crowds from the first bell to the last. Apparently matchmaker Peter Moran had made a mistake with this match, since both fighters had similar fighting styles that resulted in a boring fight. Peter Moran had predicted a knockout. In fact, Moran had said, "If the fight doesn't end in a knockout, I'll quit the fight game and never sign up another match." Now, in the spring of 1936, Jack Blackburn unexpectedly showed up at the Arcadia gym looking for Jersey Joe Walcott. It had been 2 years since Walcott had spoken with Blackburn. Jack looked far more prosperous than the last time he and Walcott had spoken. Jack explained that he was looking to hire Walcott as a sparring partner for Joe Louis. Louis was in New Jersey training for his first fight with Max Schmeling. If Walcott was interested, the job paid $25 a round and guaranteed at least 1 round a day. "What do you say?" asked Blackburn. Of course, Walcott said yes. For a fellow who typically worked 50-plus hours a week and made $12 to $15 a week as a labourer, $25 a day for as little as 3 minutes of work. It was a fortune and a no-brainer. It was the best news that Walcott had heard in a long time. It was big money for him at last. A few days later, Walcott showed up at the Louis training camp at the Stanley Hotel in Lakewood, New Jersey. Louis's team had their quarters at the hotel. The Brown Bomber bunked at a house called the Albert Mansion. The hotel's owner, Harry Cohen, had pine trees cut and an area behind the hotel cleared. He then had an outdoor stadium built that could seat 3,000 people, as well as a workout area complete with a boxing ring. It was here, in a shaded backyard area, that Louis held his workouts. Cohen was hoping to make his hotel a regular place for Joe Louis to train. There's been several different versions written about this sparring session between Jersey Joe and Joe Louis. In an interview in 1947, Joe Walcott claimed to have decked Joe Louis during the first day of the sparring and was subsequently fired by Jack Blackburn after being paid $25. He said, "I crossed the right to Louis's head. That made his eyes narrow. I stepped around and stabbed him with jabs. I kept in motion from side to side. The harder he tried, the worse it looked. He dubbed his shots badly. As he lunged and missed with one big angry left hook, I came back with a right to the face. It wasn't a hard punch and couldn't have hurt, but it was perfectly placed and enough to knock him off balance. He stumbled awkwardly across the ring. The rope saved him from falling face first, and he landed on both knees. Technically, in a fight, it would have been a knockdown." Training camp observers, though, discount such mishaps to their star performer, and they possibly chalk that off as an error in footwork. But Joe's wife, Marva, and Jack Blackburn laughed out loud. They were joined by Carl Nelson, Joe's detective bodyguard, and Julian Black. Joe Walcott said, "I think I could not suppress a smile. Louis became furious, and later that evening, after dinner, Jack Blackburn took me aside. 'I'm sorry,' he said, 'but they've decided that you ain't got the right style for Louis. You'll have to go.' He counted out $25 into my hand. 'I have to be a punching bag for the great Joe Louis too, or there's no match,' I said with some bitterness. Jack turned his head up at me with such a look of understanding that I've never forgotten. He was a friend. Now, it has been accepted by some boxing historians that Walcott knocked Louis down. On the other hand, there is little doubt that Louis knocked Walcott down, since there are photos from a newspaper that show in sequence Walcott fall into the canvas during his sparring match with Louis. Jersey Joe, nevertheless, had these words to say about the photos that was supposed to show Louis knocking him down. He said, "Some newspapers even carried a series of movie photos portraying to show Louis flooring me, but that was as much baloney as Joe's statement that I never worked with him." However, the sparring match went between Jersey Joe Walcott and Joe Louis. One thing is for sure, Walcott was fired and he was sent packing. Dejected, Jersey hitched a ride on a grocery store truck and headed back to Merchantville. A week after the disappointing sparring session with Joe Louis, Walcott was back at the Camden Convention Hall facing Billy Ketchell, the Millville ploughboy. Ketchell, whose real name was Basil Clucker, was a tough, strong light heavyweight who wasn't afraid to face many of the best fighters in his weight class. Walcott and Ketchel would fight a total of 3 times in 1936. Joe claimed that the fights were right up there with the most difficult of his career. The first fight was on June 4th, 1936, and it was a fast-paced 10-round draw. 12 days after his fight with Ketchel, Walcott was back in the squared circle. Because of some favourable press he had received after his sparring session with Lewis, he was signed to fight in a Jack Dempsey-sponsored heavyweight tournament. The event was held at the Coney Island Velodrome on June 16, 1936. Essentially, the tournament was designed to find the next White Hope, but fighters of all ethnicities were allowed to enter. Walcott was matched against French-Canadian heavyweight Louis Lepage of Paterson, New Jersey. The former great heavyweight contender, Joe Jeanette, acted as Walcott's second. Of course, it must have been a great honour for Walcott to work with Jeanette, who was considered one of the great fighters of the turn of the century. Jeanette, who was born on August 28, 1879, in New Bergen, New Jersey, began boxing on a dare at the age of 25. Because the colour line was in full force during Jeanette's time, black fighters didn't have a lot of options when it came to who they could fight. As a result, coloured fighters would repeatedly face each other. Jack battled Jack Johnson no less than 10 times, Sam Langford 15 times, and battling Jim Johnson 7 times. Jeanette also fought Sam McVeigh 5 times, which included one of the longest marathon fights in boxing history. On April 17, 1909, McVeigh and Jeanette battled for 3.5 hours over the course of 49 rounds. During the fight, Jeanette was knocked down 27 times and McVeigh 19 times. In the end, exhausted, with his eyes swollen shut, McVeigh was unable to rise from his stool, so Jeanette was declared the winner. So with such a fabled ring great in his corner to guide him, Jersey Joe was confident. Walcott went out and destroyed Lepage, knocking him down once in the first, once in the second, and dropping him for good in the third. For his victory, Joe received $125. But since he didn't exactly meet the requirements for a White Hope, he was not asked to return. On the evening of June 19, 1936, 3 days after the White Hope tournament, Jersey Joe Walcott did what 60 million other Americans did. He sat near a radio along with friends and family members and listened to the live action-packed round-by-round broadcast of the Joe Louis-Max Schmeling fight. Although this fight was nowhere near the political giant the second fight would be, it had nonetheless captured the attention of most of the world. There was trouble brewing in Europe as Hitler and his Nazis were preaching iron superiority and anti-Jewish ideology. As a result, the fight turned out to be more than a simple boxing match. Schmeling, although not a Nazi, was viewed to some extent as representing the enemy. In fact, some Jewish organisation protested the fight, claiming that Schmeling represented Nazi Germany. But in reality, Max was inadvertently mixed up with the trouble that was starting in Europe. Louis, on the other hand, was viewed as the hero of the free world. In the 2 short years that he had been boxing, Joe had become one of the most famous athletes on the planet, as well as a hero and hopes to blacks in America. The fight was America versus Germany, and it wasn't just blacks that were rooting for a Louis victory. It was most of America, even some southern whites. As millions of Americans sat and listened to the fight, they were shocked at what unfolded. The contest turned out to be one of the greatest upsets in boxing history. Although Louis entered the ring as a 10-1 favourite, he was overconfident and not in top shape. Schmeling, on the other hand, had trained like a monk and had studied Louis's fighting style. Max claimed that he had found a weakness in Joe's style while watching films of the Louis fights. This discovered weakness led to his famous quote, "I see something." The something that Schmeling saw was a chink in the Louis armour. When Louis threw a jab with his left hand, he dropped his left arm. This tendency to drop his left after throwing the jab resulted in Louis being wide open for a counter right-hand punch. Schmeling's plan was to counterpunch with his powerful right over Louis's left, and the plan worked. Schmeling knocked out the previously unbeaten Brown Bomber in the 12th round. The entire nation reeled under the shocking loss, especially black people. When Jersey Joe Walcott looked out of his window after the fight at the streets of Camden, they were quiet. There were no celebrations after the Louis defeat. 3 days after Louis's unexpected loss at the hands of Schmeling, Walcott was in the ring with journeyman Phil Johnson. Little did Joe Walcott realise at the time of the Johnson fight, nearly 14 years later, he would actually go on to fight Phil's then 7-year-old son, Harold. Phil and Harold would have the distinction of being the first father and son to fight and lose to the same fighter, both suffering third-round knockout losses to Joe Walcott. Johnson was a stylish boxer, possessing a sharp jab and a good punch, but unfortunately Phil was not managed well and was overmatched during his early boxing career, and as a result, he became nothing more than a journeyman fighter, a stepping stone for future champions and top contenders. The fight played out under the stars at Philly's ballpark on June 22, 1936, on the eve of the Democratic National Convention. Walcott scored a technical knockout in the third round when he broke Johnson's nose with a right-hand punch that left his opponent bloodied and unable to continue. Although the main event didn't live up to the hype, the evening turned out to be a success, with a sellout crowd of 15,000 spectators spending $40,000, the biggest gate in Philadelphia since Steve Hamas had defeated Max Schmeling at the convention hall 2.5 years earlier. The main event featured two popular Philadelphia fighters, former Walcott opponent Alator going up against Leroy Haynes. It turned out to be a lackluster affair, prompting newspaper writer Matt Ring to say, "All the fans got out of it was 15 rounds of arduous cuffing, mauling and clinching, with nary a knockdown, not even a staggering blow to relieve the tedium. Good clean punching was so scarce that it evoked a roar from the crowd whenever some of it intruded on the proceedings." They'd also even brought the famous Cinderella Man and heavyweight champion James J. Braddock as referee for that event. 22 days after the Johnson fight, Walcott took on Billy Ketchel for the second time at the Pennsauken Arena. No doubt Walcott remembered how tough his previous fight with Ketchel was. The second fight turned out to be even tougher. In fact, the fight turned out to be one of the toughest of Walcott's career and would cause him to suffer through some of the most difficult times of his life. In the first round, Joe broke his hand on Ketchel's head and was unable to effectively punch with his right. Walcott had to use all of his craftiness and ring savvy to weather the murderous attack of Ketchel just to finish the fight on his feet. After 10 hard-fought rounds, the fight was ruled a draw. Following the fight, an aching Walcott was taken to Cooper's Hospital to have his broken fist put into a cast. With his hand in a cast and the Great Depression well underway, jobs were hard to come by, especially for a black man. The Creams were soon back on relief checks and were barely scraping by. Desperate for money, Walcott removed his cast only after a few weeks and refractured his hand in a fight with Carmen Passarella. The fight, an 8-round decision victory, did little to help with Walcott's financial troubles or the healing of his broken hand. A trip to Cooper Hospital followed after the fight to recast Jersey Joe's broken knuckles. A month later, again out of desperation for food and rent money and no credit available to hold the Creams over until Joe's hand could heal, Walcott was forced yet again to remove his cast early to fight Billy Ketchel for the third time. The fight resulted in a 10-round decision loss for Jersey Joe, as well as refracturing his hand for a second time. This time, there'd be no removing of the cast because there was a possibility that Jersey Joe could permanently injure his hand and end his boxing career. Unable to fight because of his broken hand, or find a steady job because of the depression, Walcott was out of work for the better part of the next 8 months. His wife Lydia worked as much as she could to help supplement the meagre relief checks. Since she was pregnant with their third child, as a due date neared, she had to stop working altogether. Joe and Lydia literally had to plead with the grocery store to get enough food to survive as the Creams fell further and further behind. Finally, a little luck came Jersey Joe's way. He was rushed into a match against Tiger Jack Fox at the Rockland Palace in Harlem on May the 22nd, 1937. Tiger Fox was one of several popular Rockland Palace house fighters. Tiger was also one of the most dangerous light heavyweights of the day. Born John Linwood Fox, April the 2nd, 1907 in Indianapolis, Fox began boxing about the age of 18, and some sources claim that Fox may have started boxing as early as the age of 13. Starting a professional career at such a young age was not unheard of during the early part of the 20th century. When Jersey Joe took on Tiger Jack Fox, he was in no shape to be fighting one of the greatest light heavyweights of all time. A fighter that Joe claimed was the single greatest fighter he ever faced. Joe had not been in the ring in 8 months, and had done only minimal training. Furthermore, he hadn't been eating properly and was underweight from proper lack of nutrition. Walcott came into the fight at 184 pounds, with Tiger at 178. Now, despite Walcott's condition, the first round began well for Joe. He connected with a solid right to Fox's chin that sent Tiger Jack through the ropes and out onto the apron of the ring, where he laid still for 7 seconds. Fox then jumped up suddenly and quickly rushed back into the ring. The crowd went absolutely wild. Nobody had ever knocked Tiger Jack out of the ring before. Once back in the ring, Fox proceeded to take command of the fight over the course of the next several rounds. By the 8th, it was all Fox, as a tired, undernourished Jersey Joe Walcott took a frightful beating and was counted out. In Joe's own words, he said, "I was counted out in the 8th round, counted out from sheer weakness." Although defeated, Walcott put up a good enough showing for Al Douglas, the owner of the Rockland Palace, to want him to come back. The next day, Walcott's meagre purse of $122 went to pay a dozen creditors. He cautiously took care of the most important ones first, but was still short on rent. His landlord gave him an ultimatum: pay or get out. Walcott, pointing to his wife, who was due to have their third child any day, pleaded with the landlord and promised to pay him as soon as he could. Jersey Joe's third child, Doris, was born on June the 5th, 1937. He kept his family fed by working down at the Philadelphia docks, but was once again short on rent. The landlord's case was simply presented: get out by the end of the month. Once again, Walcott was forced to move his family from one ramshackle place to another. On June the 22nd, Walcott, along with his cousin Willie, the Joplin ghost Amos, and about a dozen friends and family members sat around a radio at Willie's house. They tuned in to the Joe Louis and James Braddock fight and listened excitedly as Louis knocked out the Cinderella Man in the 8th round. Walcott, although happy with Louis's victory, couldn't help but feel sad at how life had kicked him around. How he had missed out on the opportunity 3 years before to go to Chicago with Blackburn. Walcott's cousin, Willie, noticed Walcott's sadness, put his arms around Jersey Joe and said, "You'll be next, Reds. Let them give you a break and you'll do it too." Jersey Joe's next fight was nearly 4 months later, on September the 3rd, 1937, a quick second-round knockout of Joe Lips. He was then signed to fight another Rockland Palace regular, the dangerous slugger Elmer Violent Ray. At 6'2" and 195 pounds, Ray was a formidable opponent and was known as a thunderous puncher. The fight would mark the start of a 3-fight series, with Ray beginning at the Rockland Palace on September the 25th, 1937. And as a side note, Elmer Ray was born sometime around 1910 in Florida, and as a young man he actually wrestled alligators for money, but eventually found his way into boxing. He began his career fighting in battle royales sometime around 1926, when he was known as Bearcat Ray and Kid Violent Ray. These dangerous fights featured anywhere from 3 to 10 fighters in the same ring, oftentimes blindfolded. The fighters would beat each other senseless until only one remained. The last man standing was declared the winner. Now, the fight actually turned out to be an easy one for Joe Walcott. He actually took Elmer Ray apart quickly and ended matters with a hard right to the jaw and a left hook to the belly at the 43-second mark of the 3rd round. The reason for Walcott's easy win may have had something to do with the fact that Ray, much like Jersey Joe, was barely scraping by and was undertrained and undeferred. As Jersey Joe later said about his first fight with Elmer Ray, "I recognised Ray as a kindred soul as soon as I threw a right to the body. The spirit was willing, but the stomach was empty." For his victory over Ray, Walcott received $125 and an invitation by Al Douglas to come back in a few weeks to fight George Brothers. It was an invitation that the cash-strapped Walcott couldn't refuse. On October the 9th, Jersey Joe was back at the Rockland Palace and in the ring to face Brothers. The fight started off easy for Walcott. He floored the former Golden Glove light heavyweight champion 3 times in round 1. The 3 knockdown rule was not in effect, so Brothers was allowed to continue to get up and fight after the 3rd knockdown. According to Irving Rudd, the Rockland Palace press agent who was covering the fight, some of the people in the crowd got up and started to make for the exits, since they figured that the fight was going to be over quickly. As one guy leaves, he waves at Brothers and says, "Goodbye, boy. Don't get up or he's going to knock you down again." Brothers sits there looking at the fan, spits out a mouthful of blood and teeth, shakes his head and just glares. Then he pulls himself up, carries the fight to Jersey Joe. Brothers lasts the 8 rounds and comes off with a decision. The fight was Walcott's last of 1937. While it had been a hard year for Jersey Joe, the hard times were far from over. The first half of 1938, Walcott had half a dozen fights, about one a month. These fights, along with his daytime job, kept the family afloat financially, albeit just barely. In January, Walcott fought twice. First up was Freddie Fudicia, a tough Italian from Newark, New Jersey, who had only lost one fight in his last 15 starts. The fight was chief support to the Al Ettore and Gus D'Orazio main event, held at the Philadelphia Arena on January 1st, 1938. Jersey Joe easily outboxed Freddie for the first 6 rounds. In the 7th, Freddie burst forth in a wild rally and knocked Joe down for the count of 2. Freddie continued his rally into the 8th and final round, but it was too late. Since Walcott had already swept the first 6 rounds, he was awarded the 8-round decision. Walcott was part of Pete Moran's stable of fighters fighting out of Philadelphia. Moran was a matchmaker from the Adelphia Athletic Club and was one of the great boxing hustlers from Philly during the 30s and 40s. Pete's stable of fighters included Leroy Hayes, Mickey Keach and Frank Donofrio. Walcott's manager at the time was Bill Brooks. Brooks had decided to keep Jersey Joe on a busy schedule and quickly had Joe signed for a fight. On January 10th, at the Olympia Athletic Club in Philadelphia, Walcott continued his winnings by earning a decision over Jim Whitest by breaking his opponent's jaw in the process. A month and a half after the Whitest victory, Jersey Joe was signed to fight journeyman Art Sykes. Walcott scored a 4th-round knockout over Sykes with a right to the jaw. Less than 3 weeks after the Sykes fight, Jersey Joe faced Lorenzo Pack at the Camden Convention Hall. Pack, who had been in the ring with the likes of Tiger Jack Fox, Two-Ton Tony Galento and Leroy Haynes, was a tough guy and was not afraid of Jersey Joe. Prior to the fight, Lorenzo was boasting, according to Walcott, that he would splash me all over the Camden landscape. Pack fought as if he intended to make good on his boast. In Walcott's own words, he said, "Nobody ever hit me so hard and often. In the 4th round, I drew him to me with a right that was deliberately short. I shifted to a left hook that burst on the point of his chin. Like Al King and Roxy Allen, Lorenzo crashed backwards, slammed his head against the floor, and went completely unconscious." Jersey Joe was once again filled with the terror that he might have killed an opponent. Fortunately again, Pack's head cleared the next afternoon. Walcott had racked up 4 wins since the start of 1938. This was good enough to get him a rematch with the dangerous Tiger Jack Fox. After a close 10-round brawl at the Camden Convention Hall on May 10th, Tiger Jack was awarded the decision. A few weeks later, Walcott dropped another close decision to former Joe Louis opponent Roy Lazar at the Fairview Arena in Camden. Having lost 2 in a row, there was suddenly little demand for Walcott's services. The second half of 1938 was extremely bleak for Jersey Joe and his family. As the holidays approached, the Creams were penniless and Joe had not fought in nearly 6 months. The jobs he had managed to get were sporadic and didn't pay very well. To add to his worries, Joe was reminded daily that Christmas was approaching. His oldest son Buddy and daughter Elva were anxiously awaiting the arrival of Santa Claus and what he might bring. Jersey Joe was rushed into a match against Bobto on December 23rd, just 2 days before Christmas. He said, "The Lord rescued us from disappointing the little ones." Starring in the main event of the boxing and wrestling show at the Camden Armory before a crowd of 5,500, Walcott easily outpointed Toe. He only lost 1 round of the fight, the 5th, when Toe used an effective body attack to win the round. When the bout was over, Jersey Joe was awarded the decision and $75, allowing Santa Claus to come on schedule. Although the Toe fight was a victory, Walcott had decided that he needed to make an effort to get out of the uncertainties of boxing. He applied for a job on the Pensauken Township Police Force, but the expected opening never came. Jersey Joe spent the next 2 years taking any job that came his way and fighting occasionally. In June of 1939, Walcott's 4th child, Ruth, was born. 2 months later, Jersey Joe took on Hungarian fighter Al Boris at the Meadowbrook Bowl in Newark, New Jersey. Boris possessed a slam bang style that helped him little against the slick Walcott. Joe won an 8-round decision and received $90. The following November, Walcott was back at the Rockland Palace. This time he was taking on a fighter named Curtis the Hatchet Man Shepherd. Shepherd had a reputation as a powerful puncher. He began his professional career in 1938 with a one-round knockout of Larry White. Before his pro career, he had a successful amateur one. Shepherd had made it to the finals of the New York Golden Gloves tournament in the light heavyweight division, but lost on a decision to Gus Alexander. In the same year, on March 21st, Shepherd won the Intercity Golden Gloves Championship at heavyweight by a decision versus Dan Merritt. His fight with Jersey Joe would be the first of two for the pair. Walcott earned an 8-round decision over the inexperienced Hatchet Man, who at the time had only 9 professional fights under his belt, and for that win, Walcott was paid $100. Jersey Joe began 1940 with a 6-round decision win over journeyman Tiger Red Lewis. He had won 4 in a row and was on a roll. It was once again time for Walcott to step up and face a top 10 opponent. That opponent turned out to be a giant of a man, number 4 ranked contender, Abe Simon, nicknamed Skyscraper Abe. At 6'5" and weighing anywhere from 250 to 260 pounds, Big Abe was the largest fighter that Jersey Joe ever fought. He was born Abraham Simon on January 1st, 1913 in Long Island, New York. As a teenager of 16, Abe was larger than most full-grown men, standing well over 6 feet tall and weighing in excess of 200 pounds. Abe's freakish size was found to be caused by an overacted gland which caused rapid growth in the teenage Simon. One story tells how when Abe at 16 showed up for class the first day and said to the teacher in his deep bass voice, "My name is Abe Simon, where do I sit?" the teacher replied, "Anywhere you want." As a full-grown man, Abe was massively built and strong. He had huge feet, one report as a size 18, and massive hands. In fact, Abe owed some of the largest hands ever recorded on a heavyweight fighter. But for all his fearsome appearance, Abe was a gentle giant. Not only big and strong, but also very intelligent. In high school, Abe excelled in academics as well as athletics and was offered a scholarship to Yale, but turned it down so that he could pursue his boxing career. Abe's biggest win would come against Jersey Joe Walcott. The fight took place on February 12, 1940 at Laurel Gardens in Newark, New Jersey. Skyscraper Abe entered the ring at 256 pounds to Walcott's reported 192. Walcott claimed he only weighed about 180 pounds for the Simon fight. Coming into the fight, Joe was out of shape and hungry, having only eaten a few potatoes along with some tea the day before. This was hardly the nutrition needed to fight a man with the size and strength of Abe Simon. In fact, Walcott said he never entered a fight before feeling like he had less energy. Although in poor condition and with his stomach literally growling from hunger, Walcott performed well for a while. Jersey Joe won the first few rounds easily by out-jabbing and out-manoeuvring the bigger, slower Simon. Walcott landed a number of hard rights and left hooks, shaking up the bigger fighter on several occasions. Eventually, though, after wrestling with and being mauled by the massively strong Abe for 6 rounds, Walcott's lack of conditioning and improper diet finally caught up with him. In the 6th round, Big Abe landed a powerful right to Walcott's jaw, sending him to the canvas. Too exhausted to rise and to continue, Jersey Joe was counted out. He was beaten more by fatigue and hunger than by Abe's fighting ability. Walcott later said about the Simon fight, "Although I had been winning all the way, my arms grew terribly heavy. By the 6th, they would no longer obey me, and my whole frame gave way. When I stumbled into Simon's glove, there was nothing left." Years after the fight with Walcott, Abe conceded that Jersey Joe had punched harder than any fighter that he'd fought in his career, including the great Joe Louis. Following the loss to Simon, Walcott was fed up and he was discouraged. The defeat was another setback in a career filled with setbacks. After fighting for the better part of 10 years, his career was just going nowhere. After years of fighting for small purses, bluffing his way through fights because he was out of shape, being ripped off by shady managers and not making enough money to support his family, Jersey Joe finally decided that he'd had enough. No longer did Jersey Joe have the dream of winning the heavyweight title. Gone was his boyhood enthusiasm he shared with his late father as they spoke of past ring legends. Boxing was now nothing more than a dangerous job to fall back on when there was no other way to make money to feed his family. It was with a heavy heart that he decided to give up his dream of winning the heavyweight title. But what choice did he have? How could he continue when there was never enough money to train or eat properly? After all, he was responsible as the head of a growing family with a wife who was only a few months away from giving birth to their 5th child. What Jersey Joe needed was a steady job with steady income, something his sporadic boxing career couldn't provide. In February of 1940, the 26-year-old Walcott made the difficult decision to retire from boxing. Now, it wasn't the first time Joe had quit the ring. He'd done it several times before, but this time, he was serious. A few days after the decision to end his boxing career, Walcott picked up a job working on a coal delivery truck, but the job only lasted a few months. When winter ended, so did the job. In July, Lydia gave birth to Vincent, their 5th child. With another hungry baby to feed, Walcott took whatever job he could find. For the next year and a half, he worked at quite a few different occupations, including such filthy jobs as garbage collector and septic tank cleaner. Although employed most of the time, these jobs, like all others, barely paid enough to support the Cream family and keep the bill collectors at bay. Consequently, Joe was constantly living on credit and was never able to get ahead. Shortly after Walcott decided to stop boxing, former heavyweight champion Jack Johnson came to Merchantville, looking specifically for Jersey Joe Walcott. The ex-champion stopped at the house of Joe's former teacher, Miss Lena Skelly, and sent word for Walcott to come over, which he did. After Walcott arrived, Johnson explained that he was interested in managing and training him. His response to Johnson was that he'd have to think it over. But after the loss to Simon, Walcott's mind was made up, and even an offer from the famous former heavyweight champion didn't tempt Walcott back into the ring. For the next year and a half, Jersey Joe worked at whatever manual labour jobs he could find to feed his family. On December the 7th, 1941, the Japanese attacked the United States at Pearl Harbor, drawing the US into the Second World War. As a result of the war, jobs were created and workers were needed to maintain ships for the military at New York shipyards near Camden. It was here that Walcott landed a decent wartime job. He started off as an unskilled labourer and worked his way up to a caulker and chipper. On a good week he could make such as $85, but his take-home pay was usually around $58. Although the shipyard was a decent job, Jersey Joe continued to have financial difficulties as he was constantly in debt to creditors and living paycheck to paycheck. Walcott worked at the shipyard from 1942 to 1944. In June of 1944, out of necessity to earn some extra money, he fought 2 easy fights against nondescript opponents. He won both fights easily, even though he had not fought in 4 years and 4 months. The first fight was an 8-round decision over New York heavyweight Felix DePaloli. The second was a 3rd-round knockout over Ellis Singleton. The extra money for the 2 fights went quickly, since Joe was in debt to several people, such as the grocery store owner and landlord. On December the 14th, Lydia gave birth yet again to their 6th child, Carol, and the Creams were totally scraping the bottom of the barrel. In Joe's own words, he said, "I couldn't have gone any farther down the drain if I had pulled the stopper out myself." Although Jersey Joe had the 2 fights in June, his attitude towards boxing had not changed. In fact, he even reverted to using his birth name as a comeback, was the farthest thing from his mind, as worried about how he was going to support his family and a new baby. But destiny, in the form of a neat, little-looking Italian man, was about to step into Arnold's life and change it forever. 4 days after Arnold's daughter Carol was born, in late 1944, Arnold was shopping and got introduced Felix Bacchicchio by Mr. Popkin, the store's owner. Felix, dressed in a grey-pin striped suit and tie, was a neat-looking little Italian man with a slight build. He gave the impression of being every bit the 1940s gangster, with jet black hair that was slicked straight back, an ever-present Lucky Strike cigarette hanging from his bottom lip, and a limp from an old bullet wound when he walked. Felix was also the local fight promoter and president of the newly opened Camden Athletic Club. Together with his friends Vic Marsilio and Bart Guino, Felix had just recently opened the Camden Athletic Club and was staging the club's boxing shows at the Camden Convention Hall. Felix and Vic had known each other for years and used to put on fight cards at the old Camden Armoury. Formerly, Vic was acting matchmaker and a fight manager. Bart had the official title of matchmaker. Felix was a well-known figure around New Jersey and Philadelphia. He was also a well-known underworld criminal, gambler and gangster. In fact, Felix was described by writer Bill Kelly as being so crooked that he had to screw his socks on. Felix's nickname was Man o' War, after the famous racehorse. He was born August 31st, 1907 in Philadelphia, shortly after his parents emigrated to the US from Italy. Felix's father, Andrew, was a barber. He plied his trade in a shop he owned and operated in Philadelphia. His mother, Claudine, was a housewife, and Felix grew up on the tough streets of Philly along with his two brothers, Nicky and Ronald. As a young man, Felix worked at a pharmacy, but soon became involved in a sordid life of crime. Having been introduced to Arnold, Felix explained that he was a fight promoter for the newly opened Camden Athletic Club and was looking for a good local heavyweight fighter to promote, someone who could draw some attention and help boost ticket sales, which had been low as of late. In fact, after having talked with Roxy Allen a few days before, Felix had been looking for Jersey Joe Walcott. "This is funny," said Felix. "I ran into Roxy Allen the other day and told him what I needed to boost the boxing business in Camden was another pair attraction like him and you." Roxy said, "I'm through with boxing, but go after Walcott. He's around. He's no more than 30. I was thinking of digging you up." At the time, Felix had offered no proposition. Instead, he told Arnold, "Say if I can help you in any way, don't be afraid to ask. My office is at the Camden Athletic Corporation on Market Street." Arnold's next step was dictated by the demands of an empty pocketbook, a family with 6 children, and Christmas just a week away. He went to Felix's office the next day. Felix was unavailable, so Arnold left word that he'd stop by, along with his address on Magnolia Street. The next evening, much to Arnold's surprise, Felix stopped by his house. It's a good bet that Felix had not visited many homes that were in the condition that Arnold's house was in. It was a ramshackle 2-bedroom, 2-story shack, one of a row of such houses in the Matchtown neighbourhood. The house had wind and light seeping in through the countless cracks in the woodwork, no glass in the windows, and a hole in the front door big enough to put a football through. The hole was covered with an old dingy piece of brown Balep tap. The windows were covered with cardboard, and the paint which once covered the house had now mostly flaked away. A stove in the kitchen where the family could huddle round to keep warm provided the only heat when there was enough coal to fire it up. Years later, in an interview, Felix described entering Arnold's house. He said, "The children were huddled around the kitchen stove, and there were just 2 bedrooms for 8 people. Even if Arnold would have turned down my offer to fight, I would have still done something for his family, because they really needed it." Once in the Cream's house, Felix seemed more concerned with getting some coal for Arnold and his family than he was about actually getting him to fight again. Felix's only reference to fighting came as he was leaving. He said, "If you want to fight again, I'll get you a manager and get you started. I'll make one promise. Whatever you earn, you'll get. All you need is a little confidence." What Arnold really needed was some coal. Felix took care of Arnold's request. The next day, 2 days before Christmas, Felix had a ton of coal delivered to the Cream's basement. Arnold said, "I think we never had a happier Christmas." From then on, he would often refer to Felix as his good angel. Seeing that Felix was a man of his word, Arnold made up his mind to go and talk with Felix. It was one of the best decisions he ever made. It would be a decision that would affect the rest of his life. On Tuesday, the day after Christmas of 1944, Arnold walked a few blocks from his house over to the Camden Athletic Club, which was located at 221 Market Street. He happened to meet up with Felix on the corner of Market Street and 3rd Street, right outside of his office. Together, the two spoke, and Felix gave Arnold his sales pitch. He said, "So, do you want to fight again?" "I'm not sure," replied Arnold. "Mr. Felix, my family is getting along, and I don't know if I want to take a chance on fighting again. Boxing never got me nothing before, and all I want is a steady job so my wife and kids can eat regular, and I can put coal in the cellar. I'm over 30, and I'm just plain tired of it all." Looking to close the sale, Felix replied, "Look, I'll give you money up front, and I'll make sure you have enough money each week to take care of your family." "I don't know," replied Arnold. "I guess one more shot wouldn't kill me." With coal in the basement, and a cash advance on future earnings from Felix, the burden of finances and food was finally off of Arnold's mind. He was now set to return to the ring. At 30 years old, an age when most fighters have already won titles, and well into their championship reigns, Jersey Joe Walcott was just getting set to return and start his incredible climb to the heavyweight title. He was about to show the world what he could do with proper training, management, and food. Felix, as promised, brought in Joe Webster, a wealthy cafe owner, to manage Walcott. He then went to the Commissioner John Hall and had Walcott's boxing licence reinstated. Next, Felix set Joe up with a new trainer, a middle-aged Italian guy named Nick Florio. Nick Florio was born in 1904, the year the family emigrated from Italy to the United States. The Florio family settled in the Bronx, New York, and it was in the Bronx that Nick and his brother Dan grew up and became involved in the fight game. As a young man, Nick was a bantamweight fighter. After his boxing career, he and Dan began training and managing fighters. Together, the two brothers had been in the boxing business since the 1920s and had done a little of everything. The Florio brothers had trained a who's who of fighters, which included Roland Lastraza, Nick Barone, Battling Battalino, Tony Canzoniere, and NBA World Featherweight champion Pete Scalzo. After Walcott retired, Nick would continue to train fighters, eventually working as a cutman with Floyd Patterson and a young Cassius Clay. Nick turned out to be a great trainer for Jersey Joe. Together over the next few years, they would develop such moves as the famous Walcott Shuffle, a forerunner of the Ali Shuffle, and the Walkaway. Together, they would also perfect Walcott's feinting and hand movements. It was the first time in Walcott's boxing career that he had world-class training. With regular training and eating routine, Jersey Joe began working out, eating the way he should have been doing during the early part of his career, 3 square meals a day, with plenty of meat and vegetables and a lot of road work. With this, he could actually concentrate on getting into fighting shape. Although he had to continue to work at the shipyard during the early part of his comeback, he didn't have to work the grueling 50-plus hours a week. He was able to spend a lot more time in the gym than he had been able to do any other previous time during his early career. Webster and Felix planned to keep Walcott on a busy fighting schedule by having him fight about once a month. The two wasted no time in getting Walcott his first fight back. Jersey Joe made his return to the ring on January the 11th, 1945, against journeyman Jackie Saunders at the Camden Convention Hall. He knocked out the left-handed Saunders in the second round. 2 weeks later, Jersey Joe faced Johnny Allen on the 25th of January. The fight held again at the Camden Convention Hall, but it was a disappointment for Walcott and almost ended his comeback. Still rusty, Walcott lost a disputed 8-round decision to Allen. After the fight, Walcott was very upset and disappointed. He told his handlers that he was definitely going to hang up his gloves now. Felix Pacquiao and Vic Marcillo wouldn't hear any of it, and after much talking, they convinced Jersey Joe to continue. To get Walcott's confidence back after his loss to Johnny Allen, Pacquiao and Webster matched Jersey Joe against Austin Johnson, an inexperienced fighter with only 8 professional fights. Walcott easily outpointed Johnson at the Camden Convention Hall and was awarded a 6-round decision. With a win under his belt, Walcott fought a rematch with Johnny Allen. Jersey Joe squared matters with Allen by winning a solid decision over the Philadelphia fighter. Next up was Big Joe Baxi, a former coal miner from Coultmont, Pennsylvania. Baxi was ranked number 4 in the world and was considered a good prospect. He defeated some good competition, such as Lou Nova, Lee Savold, Tammy Morello, and Gus D'Orazio. Baxi represented Walcott's first real test on his comeback. A win would go a long way. Business at the shipyard had slowed, and thanks to advances from Pacquiao and the assurance that his family was taken care of, Walcott was able to take a few weeks off from the work and dedicate himself to serious training. Jersey Joe trained at Ted Gleason's camp at Greenwood Lake, New Jersey. He got up early every morning for long runs through the green countryside and ate 3 big meals a day. Experienced heavyweight contender Lee Savold joined Walcott during his training camp. Lee just happened to be training at Gleason's at the same time. The two fighters became friends and spent the next few weeks working out together. Working with Lee was a blessing, since Savold had inside information on Baxi, having faced the big Pennsylvanian 3 times. Jersey Joe later recalled, "Lee Savold, one of the smartest fighters I know, worked with me. We practiced little things together and drilled as very few boxers do. The experience sent me against Baxi with absolute confidence. I felt like a colt, even though it was my most important fight in 5 years, and had passed my 31st birthday." Before a crowd of 3,500 fans on August the 3rd, 1945, at the Camden Convention Hall, Jersey Joe entered the ring, a solid and lean 188 pounds. Baxi came in at a fit 212 pounds. From the opening bell, Walcott used a strategic retreat superior boxing skill, and speed to outbox his larger opponent. Walcott upset Bax's timing and rhythm throughout the fight and used a trick on Baxter that would later become a famous Walcott move, the walkaway, in which Walcott would half turn and walk a few steps back to draw an opponent in and then turn and strike with a quick punch. Jersey Joe had this to say about that tactic. I faked a movement in one direction and went in another. I let Baxi manoeuvre me into striking range and half turning walked casually away. When he thought he had me solved, I teased him with jabs and struck him with rights. After tiring his opponent out, Walcott uncorked a sizzling attack in the 10th and final round that left his opponent groggy and bloody at the bell. The only official referee, Paul Cavalier, scored the fight 6-3-1, giving Jersey Joe a 10-round decision. The Baxi fight was a huge upset win for Walcott. The victory propelled Jersey Joe into the top 10 of heavyweight boxers for the first time in his career. News of the fight's results were sent all over the country. Jersey Joe Walcott is a new heavyweight hope. Excited with Walcott's upset victory over Baxi, Felix and his team started thinking big. But first, Felix and Webster decided to match Walcott against a couple of journeymen. Jersey Joe first faced Johnny Denson at the Camden Convention Hall on September the 20th, 1945, scoring a quick second-round knockout. Walcott then disposed of Steve Dudas a month later on October the 23rd by a fifth-round technical knockout. Team Walcott was now ready for bigger challenges as the post-war boxing climate unfolded, with heavyweight champion Joe Louis returning to civilian life after 3 years in the military service. Starting in November 1945, Felix and Webster decided it was time to step up the level of competition that Jersey Joe had faced. The boxing landscape in 1945 was littered with a lot of good fighters. There were seasoned journeyman contenders as well as truly great boxers. If Team Walcott was going to make some real money and get a shot at taking Joe Louis's title, Jersey Joe would have to face the best in the heavyweight division. The Kikio's plan was straightforward. He matched Walcott against the toughest and the most avoided fighters around. First up was the number 5 rated contender, Lee Q. Murray. Lee was a real spoiler and a big hitter. Nobody on the way up wanted to fight him. In fact, famed fight trainer Ray Arcel called Lee the biggest hitter in the division next to Joe Louis. Lee was also a seasoned professional and had been in the ring with the likes of Henry Taylor, Willie Reddish and Curtis Shepherd, and wartime interim champion Jimmy Bivins. The fact that Lee was riding an 11-fight winning streak in Baltimore was used to build up the fight. The two fighters met on November the 11th, 1945 at the Baltimore Coliseum. However, the fight turned out to be a real stinker. Walcott hurt the normally rugged Murray early in the fight and crowded him so closely that Lee was unable to do anything to Walcott. Murray's vaunted punch was never a factor. The 6'3", 207-pound Murray was disqualified in the 9th round for not trying. Joe was awarded the decision since he was the aggressor all the way and had won every round. For his victory over Lee, Walcott received a cheque in the amount of $2,000. It was the first time in his career that he had earned a 4-figure paycheck, and it had taken him 15 years to do it. Walcott's heavyweight ranking went from number 9 to number 3 after this win over Lee. On December the 10th, 1945, Walcott met Hatchet Man Shepherd at the Century Athletic Club in Baltimore. Curtis Hatchet Man Shepherd was the gatekeeper and a top-rated contender. Jersey Joe had done it before, as he'd beaten Curtis in 1939, but this time Shepherd was a much more seasoned fighter than when he and Walcott had fought 6 years earlier at the Rockland Palace. He was avoided by most fighters on the way up, and Curtis had also added to his experience since the first meeting with Walcott by fighting a number of tough contenders like Jimmy Bivins, Gus D'Orazio, Joey Maxim, and of course Lee Q. Murray. Jersey Joe entered the ring weighing 192.5 pounds and was in great shape. Curtis came in at 191.5 pounds. And for the first 3 rounds, Jersey Joe completely baffled Shepherd. Walcott using his stinging jabs, right crosses and fancy footwork, including the Walcott shuffle on the walkaway, Jersey Joe used his signature move to efficiently draw Curtis into more than one sucker punch. In the 4th round, the always dangerous Shepherd unleashed one of his powerful rights. The punch nailed Walcott on the jaw and dropped him for a few seconds. Most fighters probably would have been finished, but Jersey Joe was in top shape. He took the blow and recovered quickly. Motivated by the knockdown and perhaps thinking Walcott was hurt after such a punch, Shepherd went on the attack in the 5th and 6th and did enough to win both rounds. In the 7th, Walcott re-established his dominance, and from then on, it was all Jersey Joe. By the 10th and final round, Walcott was in complete control. He landed several smashing punches on Shepherd's chin, and the hatchet man hit the canvas, being counted out at the 2-minute and 15-second mark. It was a very good win for Jersey Joe Walcott. He received $2,400 for his victory as he steadily worked his way up the heavyweight ladder towards number 1. On January the 30th of 1946, Walcott and journeyman Johnny Allen fought just one day before Walcott turned 32 years old. It was an easy win for Walcott. He rocked Allen early in the fight and ended matters in the 3rd round, courtesy of a walloping right hand. Following the Allen fight, Felix and Webster felt it was time for Walcott to face the best fighter he had not yet faced on his comeback, Jimmy Bivens. By the time he faced Jersey Joe Walcott, Bivens was on a 27-fight win streak. He had defeated such boxers as Ezard Charles, Archie Moore, Joey Maxim, Melinio Bettina, Anton Christoforidis, Tammy Morello, Lisa Vold, Guz Lesnevich, Joey Maxim again, Lee Q. Murray and Curtis Shepherd. Bivens had proven himself to be a truly great fighter. In early February 1946, matchmaker and fight promoter for the Cleveland Arena, Larry Atkins, reported that a bout between Bivens and Walcott had been signed. The fight was scheduled for the 25th of February. Newspaper reports of the upcoming tilt acknowledged that since his return to the boxing ring a year and a half earlier, in an endeavour to feed his family, Walcott had scored 14 knockouts in 19 fights. This achievement caused some newspaper reporters to compare Walcott's recent rise from poverty to that of Jimmy Braddock, the famous Cinderella Man. They called Jersey Joe the new Cinderella Man of boxing. Other writers called him the Brown Cinderella Man. Reports on the fight also said that the winner of this fight would be next in line to get a shot at Joe Louis for the title, if Louis beat Billy Conn in their upcoming rematch. A fight with Louis is exactly what Walcott wanted. Ever since his 1936 sparring match with Louis, he felt that he could beat the Brown Bomber. Team Walcott packed their bags and headed for Cleveland. This was it. This was the make-or-break fight for Jersey Joe Walcott. A defeat here would place Walcott permanently in the journeyman category. A victory over the highly regarded Bivens would prove that Jersey Joe Walcott was for real. At the old Cleveland Arena, before a crowd of 12,166 fans, the largest of the season, Walcott and Bivens went at it. While Jimmy entered the ring, a slight favourite at 3-1, this made no difference. Jersey Joe used his superior boxing ability, speed and movement to dance around the slower Bivens. Walcott jolted Bivens early on with rights and lefts to the head and body. In the 5th, Bivens caught Walcott with his Sunday punch, a right to the head, and shook up Walcott briefly. Jersey Joe took the shot with a grin and moved right back in. During a heated exchange, Jersey Joe put Bivens on the canvas in the 7th for a count of 8, with a perfectly timed right to the jaw. It was the first time in 7 years that Bivens had visited the canvas. When Jimmy got up, Walcott battered him around the ring for the remainder of the session. In the 8th, Walcott continued to outmaneuver Bivens by landing hard rights and lefts. Jimmy did manage to tag Jersey with several solid rights during the round, but by this time, Bivens was beginning to tire and had lost some of the steam on his punches. The 9th and 10th rounds followed the same pattern as the rest of the fight, with Walcott grinning, punching, shuffling, feinting and dancing as Jimmy came forward trying to land roundhouse punches. The scoring for the fight was a little strange. The first scorecard read 6-4 to Bivens, the second 9-1 for Walcott, and the last had it 5-4-1 for Bivens. But the official with the last scorecard gave the fight to Walcott because of the knockdown. One newspaper described the bout as a sizzling fight and went on to say that the Cleveland title aspirant Bivens went into the ring as a favourite but left it badly beaten and disillusioned. It was an impressive and extremely important win for Jersey Joe Walcott. He did talk about the importance of the Bivens fight later on in his career, and he said, in February 1946, when Joe Louis was already signed to fight for his second fight with Billy Conn, he predicted that the next heavyweight champion would be Jimmy Bivens, a long-armed heavyweight who hadn't been defeated in 27 fights. Not many people knew about me. Nobody mentioned me. But that same month, I whaled the sawdust out of Bivens in Cleveland, his hometown. I floored him with a right and left to the chin for the count of 8 in the 7th round. he managed to stick it through. And I will say this for Lewis's judgment. On that night, I met Bivens. He was the best fighter I ever faced. Jimmy Bivens, he never received a title shot. Following his loss to Walcott, Jimmy also lost his next 2 bouts to Ezard Charles and Lee Q Murray. He would go on to continue his boxing career for another 9 years and have somewhat of an average record. After retiring in 1955, Jimmy worked as a boxing trainer and a driver for a bakery in Cleveland. After the Bivens fight, Team Walcott celebrated with a party back at their hotel. Joe, normally not a drinker, shared a bottle of champagne with his handlers. The fight catapulted Walcott to the #1 contender spot and earned him more money than he'd ever made. His confidence was at an all-time high. Team Walcott began calling out Joe Louis for a shot at his title. One report had Walcott brashly saying, "Now I want to box Louis. I know I'll knock him out because I trained with him in Pompton Lakes when he was preparing for Schmeling. In 2 days, I floored him 3 times with 16-ounce gloves. With light gloves, I'd tear his head off. He's too easy to hit." Unfortunately for Jersey Joe Walcott, he would have to wait 22 months and 8 more fights before he would get his shot at Joe Louis's heavyweight title. And it's at this point we're going to pause, because that is the end of part 1 of Jersey Joe Walcott's career profile. I hope you've enjoyed listening to it as much as we have putting this together for you guys. I've really enjoyed learning more about his life. And things that I didn't know about Jersey Joe is how poor he really was. Really, really poor. How he had to retire, he'd come back, he had to work so many different jobs. And already I'm thinking about his story before I've even delivered part 2 is, like, to achieve some of the things he's achieved in his career, despite all the adversity that he faced in his life, I think is quite remarkable. And I'm looking forward to putting part 2 out there in a few weeks' time, because I think it really will give us all an appreciation for what Jersey Joe Walcott brought to the table. You know, he's a really, really true underdog story. A guy that had all the talent in the world, but wasn't able to nourish it early on in his career because of poverty. Just, you know, it's crazy to even think about it. Like when you hear the descriptions of his house and how life was for them back then, it's quite humbling to sort of hear that sort of stuff, you know, given what we have in this day and age and the era we live in and accessibility to things. Doing these stories, you know, it really sort of puts it into perspective. It certainly does for me. I don't know about you guys listening, but it certainly does for me. And I've enjoyed putting it together because I've really learned so much more already about Jersey Joe. And I'm really looking forward to getting into part 2, because part 2, of course, will bring you the defining moments of his career and, of course, what he did following boxing, and the impact and the mark he left on the boxing world is certainly something to really look to. So if you've enjoyed the episode, as always, please do go and let us know on social media. You can comment on the promotional video that's out there for Jersey Joe's career profile. You can comment on Spotify. You can comment on YouTube if you've sort of watched it / listened on there. There's plenty of places to let us know what you think about it. And again, as always, please do, because it really, really helps. It's great when we see the comments come through. It's great to know that you enjoy what we're doing, that you enjoy the detail we put into these shows. And as I said at the start of the show, a big thanks goes out to Hassan, who's now joined the team and is going to be supporting me moving forward with getting these episodes prepared. And over time, hopefully we'll get to some sort of normal service resuming. So if you've enjoyed it, again, go and let me know. If you've not followed us on social media, you can do that on any social media app. Just type in BTR Boxing Podcast or BTR Boxing Podcast Network. You can find us on there. If you are not a patron and you have the ability and you're in a position to go and support us on Patreon, you can do so from as little as $1.50 a month, or I think it's about £1 in our money in the UK. It's really, really minimal. And for that, you know, you're getting access into Patreon for episodes that haven't been released to the public, and you're getting all these episodes ad free. And you just generally, you know, it's just supporting. If we had another 100 people that listened to this show that went onto that category and just did the $1.50, you know, you'd be putting us in a really, really good position where we could actually continue to expand the team. And that's ultimately what I want to do, is expand it and not just have Hassan doing stuff in the background. I have other people as well working on bringing more to the table to deliver these shows on a more regular basis. And